So let us begin, and I will start, as I usually do, by saying welcome to all of my panelists and to those of you who are in attendance. Thank you for being here today. And you can see on your screens the upcoming dates. 2 weeks from today, we are featuring cataloging and metadata librarians. And then on December 2nd, we're featuring a panel of non-traditional librarians. And then we're going to take a short recess for the holidays, and we'll be back on January 13th with state-level library services. But today we are featuring archivists, which I'm really excited about because I've said earlier, I know almost nothing about what archivists do. So I'm really excited to learn some things in this panel. So we will, as always, just continue with some questions, but please, if you are in attendance, ask your questions. You can use the chat function or the Q&A function to ask as many questions as you would like. We are happy to answer whatever it is that you would like to know. And with that, we will begin. We always start with the first question, having the panelists introduce themselves. So I would like you to tell us what your current job title is and where you work, and then tell us where you went to school and give us an overview of the path that you took to get where you are today. And I'm going to start with Natasha.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here and really excited to be able to share some information about my job. So my name is Natasha Bruns. I am the corporate archivist for General Mills. And kind of walking back through what my background is, my undergrad was in history and humanistic studies. And then when I was in my undergrad, I had some internships at both a local public museum and at the university archive. And based on that, I decided I wanted to pursue at least some form of librarianship. So I went to school at St. Catherine University with their MLIS program. And while I was there, I had an internship with General Mills in 2015 and 2016. And then a couple years later, the job opened up and I applied and was really excited to become the corporate archivist for General Mills.
That's great. Thanks so much, Natasha. And some of you who've been attending regularly may remember that a few weeks ago, we had another panelist from General Mills who was kind enough to say, hey, we have a really cool corporate archives here and we would love to include them. And I thought, oh my gosh, what a great different path than our other panelists, like Jenna, who is going to tell us a little about herself.
Sure, thanks, Olivia. I'm Jenna Jacobs. I'm the archivist for Hennepin County Library's Special Collections Department, located at the Minneapolis Central Library downtown, although today I'm at home. So my BA is also in history, Russian and Soviet history, actually, from Georgetown, which is obviously not what I'm doing right now. My MLIS and MA in history is from UW Milwaukee. So after undergrad, I did a little soul searching, tried out a few things, tried museums, tried archives, figured out archives was where I wanted to be. And after my library school and history grad school, ended up at a historical society out in South Dakota before ending up back here. I'm from Minnesota, ending up back here at Hennepin County Library. I've been here about 2.5 years, and actually I interned at this same archive between undergrad and graduate school too. So we're putting in good words for internships, I think.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jenna. And next we have Rebecca, who I seem to have lost your picture, Rebecca. There you are. And you're muted.
Yep, I broke into a coughing fit, so I didn't want to put you guys through that.
Thank you.
Non-COVID related. So I'm Rebecca Ebnett-Dazens. I'm the director of the Anoka County Historical Society. So my background is really winding and odd, and I'm the goofball in the group here. So I started out with a mass communications degree with a journalism and photography, creative writing, kind of triple major going on there, and fell into the history world, and then fell once more into the nonprofit management world. And so the archiving experience comes from one of my previous jobs where I was the only human in the museum. So you had to do it all. So there was a significant crash course in archiving. Thank you to all the friends at that point. And now I manage a staff of 6. and so need to know archiving from a slightly different angle.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. It's very exciting to have you. Very diverse backgrounds. So let's go with the next question, which is pretend that you're speaking with someone who has never heard of a library before. Now, describe your job. Jenna.
Oh, okay. So I like to say that while most librarians, so I'm changing the subject a little bit because I'm going to assume you kind of know what a librarian is. While most librarians deal with books, what I deal with is unique historical items. So these, in my case, are local history items from Hennepin County, and it can be everything from organizational records to diaries to photographs to scrapbooks. I organize them, I preserve them, and I provide access to these unique materials that probably don't exist anywhere else. So by coming to our archive is the only, and via our archivist, therefore, is the only way that you're going to have access to these things to even know that they exist or see them.
Wow, that was great. That was very clear. I liked that a lot. Cleared it up for me a little bit what you do. And Natasha.
Okay, so that is really tough to follow up, but I would kind of go on along the same line. So we store and organize historical documents, assets, like, for example, in our archive, we have quite a unique collection, including things like cereal box toys or also cereal packaging. We also have a large collection of publications, including cookbooks. And all of these collections are related to General Mills and its predecessor companies. And also something to note is that all of our items are considered non-current records.
What does that mean?
So that means once they go through the records retention cycle, we get a list and we choose things that we think would be of historical significance.
Great. Thank you so much. And Rebecca.
Well, since the question is you've never heard of a library or librarian before, I'm in luck because I'm in a museum. So clearly everybody would know about a museum, right?
Clearly.
I'm finding loopholes in your argument here.
That's fine.
So my job is to make sure that all the artifacts that are stored, much like Jenna and Natasha, where we have a special collection, they're stored and preserved correctly so that generations from now can come in and do research and find out how we lived today, but also how the people lived, as far back as we can collect. So our job is to strictly preserve the story and the legacy of anyone in Anoka County. So we restrict our collection, much like the General Mills would be restricted to their products. We restrict to Anoka County and preserving those artifacts.
Okay. How far back does it go, if I may ask?
Well, we have a bison skull currently, so that's probably the oldest object, where it's several thousand years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty old. Okay, terrific. So at this point, I want to talk about the basics, like where do these jobs begin? So let's talk about what would be the minimum qualifications for any job working in an archive, specifically through your organizations, and a starting salary or a ballpark if you have something for that. Rebecca?
Oh, brilliant. Well, we happen to be hiring an archivist right now, so I am talking to the right group. So
I bet they're cheering in the other room.
Right? Suddenly. Yeah, so if you can handle working with this, that's the only caveat. The position that we're advertising for is Audrey Hilsey's position. She moved on to another organization at the moment. So it's a $15 an hour starting salary. Nonprofits are notoriously cruddy for pay, so we offer that as an apology ahead of time. We've expanded the qualifications for the position, hoping that we can get people that have some really great skills coming out of university and grad school, and that we could be their first job. There's, wonderful people in the market that have loads of experience and we'd love them to apply to, but so often jobs, require 5 or 10 years worth of experience, and it really moves the job market away from some people that, would be really great candidates right now. So we use a program called Collective Access. And so there would be some technical skills, not necessarily knowing the program specifically, but having enough technical background in order to learn a new program, in order to manage the collections. Any background in putting numbers on things and labels on things and putting things in boxes and stuffing the sleeves of dresses correctly, and basic textile care, basic stuff care, basic flat item archive care, so that we can make sure that they are held to professional standards and that we can maintain the good name that we have right now in preservation. Being able to create some exhibits. Our staff human works very closely with myself, our volunteer coordinator, program coordinator, in creating exhibits and fabricating things. So there's some paint and spackle and nails and things that need to be used in actual exhibit creation. Being able to tell a story using things. So we come up with ideas, and that has to translate into a physical exhibit. So, it's a pretty multi-pronged approach to the job.
I can't possibly be the only one that thinks that sounded fun when you were describing it.
It is.
And I will say that Anne has linked the posting for this job from the Metronet job line right here in the chat. So if you are interested, the link is right there for you.
Thank you.
And Jenna.
Sure. So I am the only archivist in my department. I'm actually the only archivist with that title in the entirety of Hennepin County, I think. At least I was when I was hired. So my position is classed as a librarian class position. So to have my job, you would have to be a librarian. But certainly to be an archivist in other settings, you wouldn't necessarily have to be a librarian, or to work in our department, you wouldn't have to be a librarian. But to have my job, you would have to be a librarian. I looked it up on the county website, and the starting salary for a librarian at Hennepin County right now is $53,006.64 a year. There are a couple of other job classes that don't require that MLIS, and starting pay for those would be lower. In our department right now, we have 2 librarians. So it's myself and then my colleague who's the special collections librarian, dealing more with the book side of things and our digital collections. And then we also have our department manager, and we have a digitization specialist who actually is a librarian, but by job class wouldn't have to be a librarian.
Great, thank you. And Natasha.
Sure. Okay. So I would say minimum job qualifications for my position is definitely an MLIS. And definitely the salary does depend on experience. I'm not sure how our HR decides what is, I think they say like what's the fair market salary, but I would say that's probably between 40 and 50K for a starting position with the General Mills Archives. And basically how we're situated, we're kind of in an unusual spot being corporate. We are underneath the consumer relations department, who primarily deal with consumers asking questions to the company. I know we had moved previously from being underneath records retention. So at least in terms of the people who work in the archives, there is myself, and I manage all the physical collections, as well as our catalog. And then also we do have a digital asset management software that is company-wide that we contribute the historical assets to. We also have a assistant archivist who was just hired last year. And I know her starting salary was a little bit lower, but she actually does not have an MLIS. So I wouldn't say it's necessarily a requirement for all of the positions we have, because in addition, we also have ad hoc employees who help out, who are regular General Mills employees and have a passion for history.
Terrific. Wow, that was great. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the hiring process for jobs like these. Is there a standard that you go through? Is it just, submit an application and get an interview, or is there something more to that? So Natasha, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I'll probably be the unusual case because being within General Mills, they have a pretty intense hiring process, I'm not going to lie. So whenever there is a job posting, it is always posted internally for the first week. After it's gone through that process, then it's posted publicly, and we receive applications. HR reviews them first before sending them to a hiring manager. From that point, there's phone interviews, and then followed by an in-person interview, which is actually 3 different people who you interview with. So it's quite a lengthy interview process, but yeah, and then through all the standard background checks.
Terrific. Thank you. Jenna?
I would agree with Natasha. The county has a lot of hoops too, but it's a pretty standard process. The one thing I would say that's maybe a little different about archives than some other forms of librarianship is that it tends to be more of a career path where you have to be willing to move around. There aren't that many archives in comparison with libraries. And oftentimes there will be at least a fair amount of subject specific knowledge that's required. So if you happen to know a lot about a topic that's important to the history of an area or important to a particular archive, that might be useful in helping to get a job, or it might be something you have to brush up on once you get there. I know, for instance, my first full-time position out of graduate school was in Deadwood, South Dakota, which is a lot of gold rush history, a lot of Western, traditional Americana of the West sort of history. And I happened to have worked for Wells Fargo's History Museum for a while. So I knew a whole lot of Western Americana history. I knew a lot about stagecoaches, which was kind of an obscure history that a lot of people don't know, but that was useful in both of those positions. So I think did contribute to making me an asset to that organization and probably helped me to get hired into that position. So just kind of the willingness to move around might be more necessary in archives than in some areas.
That's really, really good to know, I think. Thank you. And Rebecca?
My position specifically as the director almost 6 years ago, that was a very traditional hiring process where you had the initial resume and cover letter submitted. You did the initial phone call. You got called back for a first in-person and then a second in-person, and then the job offer at that point, with most of the executive board staring at you. So it's a little daunting. The hiring process that we're doing now with this archivist, however, we've been working with a consultant on some DEAI training for the last couple of years. And in order to put our money where our mouth is on that one, what we've done is create a blind interview process. So the applications and the email with names and everything come to me in the email, and I look them over, make sure the qualifications are okay. And then they are sent a written application, and that's done through SurveyMonkey. So their name and everything is on the bottom, but I can look at question 1 across the board of all the applicants, and we're going to score those answers. And we'll do the same for question number 2 and number 3. And so those questions will receive their individual scores. And then a member of my board is going to tally up all the scores vertically, as well as the horizontal. We got the vertical score so that each individual will get a vertical score for their written application. And then the top 5 scores then will be the ones that move forward into the in-person Zoom interview.
Well, that is fascinating. I've never heard that before. What a really unique way of approaching it, pandemic-wise, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was one of the ways that we wanted to remove, name recognition. The museum world is awfully small. The archiving world is very small. So we wanted to make sure that we weren't playing favorites. We wanted to make sure that, any knee-jerk reaction to an email that would come through or a cover letter, where you get that just emotional connection or not with someone was removed. That just any of those superficial things were taken off. A lot of times the introverts, they don't get a fair shake at an interview either. So a written interview gives them an opportunity to think through some answers and present what they want to present. in the comfort of their own space. So fingers crossed that it works.
I like the concept. It's really great. Anne is telling me that there's a question in the Q&A, which for some reason did not pop up on my end. I don't know why. So hopefully Anne will keep an eye on it in case for some reason it's not notifying me. And the question is, how do you recommend finding internships or opportunities to gain experiences during the pandemic? And anyone can answer that.
Well, at least for the General Mills Archive, when the pandemic started, we did have an intern. And normally General Mills has an intern from September until the end of the school year, approximately May-ish. So this year is a little bit unusual, but we are going to be looking to hire an intern in January. It's still kind of going to be a little bit of an experimental process for us, but we're going to be posting it in our usual locations.
Okay. Anyone else?
It looks like Hennepin County Library probably will not be having interns, paid interns, at least for a little while. We're still waiting to see what our 2021 budget is going to look like. That being said, I would say reach out to archives you have an interest in, or reach out to archivists that you know and ask them what might be available. There are certainly we're still busy, there's still projects happening, and we may have volunteer opportunities available in different archives. So it can't hurt to ask, reach out to somewhere that you're curious about. And I guarantee if they're able and if they have a project, they will very much appreciate any assistance.
Yeah, I guess I'd follow up on that by saying from our standpoint, we don't have much emotional bandwidth to invest in training humans and being a mentor for an internship. So if you're starting completely from scratch and you're going to need a mentorship relationship with the organization, now unfortunately is a really crummy time. But if you've got a little bit more experience and you could do a project proposal, we would love the help. But it would have to be, I looked on your website and I saw you've got these online collections and you've got this online exhibit, and then I poked around here and here and here, and I just came up with, how about I put together this online exhibit for you, because this is a special interest area of mine and I can do it at home, so I'm not breathing on you. So it'd be more of a self-directed project.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
Cool.
I have a question.
You have a question? Okay.
Natasha, you said you posted them in the regular places. What are those places where you would post these opportunities?
So I do know that the posting is generally handled by our HR. So they post on typical job search sites. I normally also share them within the St. Catherine Facebook groups, and then also when I can, Metronet.
Great.
Thanks.
And Lynn Delisha has said that she can't see any comments in the chat. And I've asked twice now if she can see this, and I have not gotten a response. So I'm guessing she can't see any comments in the chat at all. And
she says yes.
She says yes. See, now I'm not seeing that. So apparently we're having some technical difficulties. So, but it appears Anne can see everything. So Anne, if you see something, you're going to have to jump in. Wendy's now saying she can't see comments either. I don't know why I can see those, but I can't see anything else. And Jane can't see the link that was supposed to be here. All right.
Wow, life is hard.
Life is hard today. So Zoom is apparently struggling. So to Jane, I will say that I will send out that link when I send out tomorrow. I'm going to send an email to those who attended with an evaluation for today's event. And I will be sure to include that link to the job posting that Rebecca talked about. All right.
And also, if you look on your chat box, I know everybody is familiar with Zoom and all these other things, but make sure that you, in the to box there, it says all panelists and attendees. I don't know why you can't see anything, Olivia, but.
I responded both to Lynn and to all panelists.
Okay.
So I don't know what's happening. It's just one of those weird, bizarre little things.
I was on a Zoom meeting this morning that was a little glitchy too.
Well, so long as you can see it, then we'll be okay that we can do that. All right. So I know, jumping back into our questions, I know a lot of you kind of touched on this in your overviews, but I want to address it directly. So why did you choose this particular track, becoming an archivist in the library world, as opposed to being a different type of librarian? There were so many options available to you. So why this? And Rebecca, my non-librarian, I'm going to let you go first.
I thought, oh no, she's gonna leave me till last. No such luck. So when I started out as a journalist, life was really good until I covered a news story of a little girl who was 6 and got killed by her horse. And it was at that point that I realized I wasn't cut out for hard news, because I sat around the kitchen table with the family and cried instead of doing my job. So we needed to shift gears quickly. And so I shifted over to feature writing. And as I was working on the feature writing, it occurred to me that everyone started out their feature story by saying, this is the context. You have to know this before I can tell you the present story that you actually want to know about. And so knowing that present versus the past story became really important to people, and that context of place and time. And that's what made me understand that history is with everyone and everything is history. And that really put a different spin on the dusty notes that the football coach back in high school was trying to teach me. All those years and things, that history was such a drudge in high school. It was awful. And by putting the story layer on that. So from that, it turned into preserving the stories, and realizing that preserving the stories can be doing oral recordings of them. It can be preserving the physical items. It can be preserving the written words. It can be transcribing the written words because people can't read cursive anymore. There's so many ways that we can preserve stories, and taking that forward, and helping create that structure as an admin person now.
That was a beautiful answer. I feel bad that I made you go first now. You should have gone last. Who wants to follow that? Jenna?
Oh, gee, thanks.
You're welcome.
No, that was a fantastic answer of Rebecca's, and I'm not sure I can add much to it. I also came to librarianship through archives more than the other way around. I became a librarian because I wanted to be an archivist. So I had a love for history. I knew that. I explored museums a little bit. I explored archives a little bit, and archives just was where I wanted to be and seemed like the best fit. That I should say, there are ways to be an archivist without being a librarian, and that is pretty common. But when I kind of weighed the different options of how I could be an archivist, it seemed like going to library school and becoming a librarian at the same time was kind of the safest route in terms of job security, that there might be more opportunities that way. Some types of archives will only hire librarians, whereas in some instances it doesn't matter as much. So that's how I kind of went backwards.
Great, wonderful. And Natasha?
Sure. So yeah, I guess I kind of have a similar experience with, I definitely had a passion for history in my undergrad. And I think the moment for me was when I was an undergrad, I asked the department chair, I was like, oh, well, what can I do with a history degree? And he kind of said, oh, well, you can teach high school. And I was kind of like, well, I'm not sure how I feel about like that being like the only thing that you can do with a history degree. So I started looking into it a little bit more. And I was like, well, I've always liked libraries. So I decided to go to library school. And while I was still in undergrad, I had a experience working at a public museum and then also with the university archive. And having that experience with the university archive in my undergrad, I think really influenced me to say like, yeah, I definitely want to go to library school because all of the archivists there were definitely librarians. And when I entered library school, I wasn't necessarily set on being an archivist just because I know the opportunities are a little bit more limited in terms of archives. But when the opportunity presents itself to do something that's a little bit more historical, it definitely jumped on the opportunity.
Great. Thank you so much. So let's talk about a typical day, if there is one. And I ask this question all the time, and everyone in every panel always says, there's no such thing as a typical day. It's different every day. But really what I want to know is what do you do? What is your actual job? What do you do with your time? So Jenna, you get to go first this time.
All right, well, I agree with everybody. There isn't really a typical day, but mainly what I do is I work a lot with stuff, organizing stuff, talking with people about possibly donating their stuff. So I work with donors, I work with incoming materials, I process collections, I create finding aids for collections. I also do some work with metadata and digitization of materials, and I do a lot of work providing reference services as well. In addition, so that's mainly in the realm of physical stuff, but stuff isn't just physical. So we also have digital stuff. We have web-based stuff that we're working with as well, but it's mainly gathering, organizing, and making accessible.
Okay, thank you. And Natasha.
Well, I feel like definitely I don't have a normal typical day, but I wish that I had more time to organize stuff because I spend a lot of times finding stuff for people who have requests or want information about our stuff or are wanting permission to use our stuff. So I would say I think this is probably a really interesting part of my job that I don't think is typical for most archivists, since we do have a collection of material that consists of packaging. We do process permissions for things like people who are looking for packaging that they want to use in a sitcom from the 1990s. So we'll get people who are asking for fruit roll-ups, for example, from 1990s, and they want to know the nitty-gritty details of like, what's the inner packaging look like? What did the fruit roll-ups come in 1990? So that's, I would say, a pretty big chunk of my day. And then also cataloging and processing collections. We are working on digitizing more items and making those accessible to employees. And also working on rolling out our database that will allow people to search our collection and just request materials directly instead of having us do that research for them. So hopefully that will help cut down some of our requests that we get. And then also another big part is content development and getting awareness for the archives internally. So we provide materials for blog posts or even writing things for internal social media like Yammer. And then also I would say another part of it is donations. So we do get donations from consumers and employees semi-regularly. So that's probably a little bit smaller part of my job, but we do process donations too.
Is your collection open to the public?
No, we are primarily employee focused. It'd be really cool if we were open to the public. But but when we do have time, we do field questions that consumers ask.
Okay.
How many of you are there, Natasha? You keep saying we, you. Who else? Who else is there?
So it's me, the assistant archivist, and then we have a third employee who actually has a pretty unique background in that she just knows a lot about General Mills because she's been working there for over 10 years.
Okay. I know why Olivia was asking that question, are you open to the public? We like to take our Osher lifelong learning class to unique libraries, collections, whatever. not during the pandemic, obviously. And wow, it would be great to go to General Mills, but we know that's not likely.
Well, depending, whenever possible, if it is for a library organization, I have given tours to students before. So
Ah.
definitely if there's an organization who asks, I'm pretty flexible and open to it, but not during the pandemic, obviously.
Obviously.
If the pandemic ever ends, you can expect a call from me, Natasha. I will be calling and asking to come tour the facility. And Rebecca, what is your typical day like?
Yes, and my typical day is overseeing a human that does their typical day, in a nutshell. So Jenna and Natasha have explained, what our archivist would do. So my job is to put out fires and work with said archivist. In my previous job, where I was the sole human, archiving meant, maybe giving tours of the historic house, taking in the items and processing them, doing the research requests. So it was actually a lot of the same, getting to know the material well enough that you could make the social media posts, that you could do the newspaper articles, that you could answer questions, the school projects, Minnesota History Day, things like that. My job now, in a typical day, more on the admin side of things, is really keeping in touch with people and reminding them that history is now and history is today and it's relevant. And just because you don't think it's history doesn't mean that you're not creating history. And so just being that constant promotional voice of, yes, there's this old thing and this is why it means something to you. So therefore you need to care about us and history and the legacy of Anoka County.
Wow, that's great. Okay, here's a fun question. What is the best thing about your job? And what is the worst thing about your job? Natasha.
Well, this one I had a lot of fun thinking about. So I would say the best part of my job is there is a lot of nostalgia and connection to the brands of General Mills, both for me personally, and then also when we are open to employees, there's a lot of people who remember things from their childhood not related to their job that really inspire them to think about their job differently. And just being able to find things that you wouldn't necessarily think we would have and being able to make them relevant again. So I would say that's the best thing. And also highlighting brand birthdays and anniversaries is really fun. It's always great to be able to utilize old packaging and see them reutilize it in like a nostalgic focused package that may appear at Target. In terms of the worst thing, I don't know if there's really the worst thing about the archives, but I would say a challenge would be that even though the Archives for General Mills was founded in 1980, a lot of employees still don't know that we exist. And I think there's a constant struggle in making sure that people are aware that we're there as a resource. And then also we do internally, employees do shift between brands quite frequently. So we do get a lot of people who don't know the history of their own brand. So that's always a struggle.
Okay. And questions about fruit roll-ups, that's got to be on the plus column, right?
Yeah.
All right, Rebecca.
All right. My worst part of my job is fundraising. I absolutely hate fundraising. It drives me up a wall to keep asking people to part with their money. So that part for me is extremely difficult. I think Audra, working with her, whenever I would hear the scream come from the back lab through the wall and down into my office was usually around the word fountain collections. So that's typically when I would hear the and somebody had done something wrong and she'd come barreling into my office with, this is why we can't have nice things. And so I think just that basic frustration of I'm here now as a human, and I'm working with an organization that started in 1934 when, you know, professional archiving wasn't a thing necessarily for county level organizations. And, you know, it's been a volunteer process to get where we are. And, you know, so there's a lot of cleanup that we're working through. So that's a struggle for that position. So warning, anybody who's applying for the job, we appreciate screams, but you know, it'll happen. The best part, I think, is finding dead grandparents and such things. You know, when someone walks in the door and they're just, they want to know something about their family. You know, people didn't leave information for them, and they come in and they feel like an orphan, you know, for whatever reason. And being able to dig through the right book and dig through the right box, or point them to another organization, or point them to another person, or, you know, just at least give them a breadcrumb to follow, even if we don't have a treasure trove for them, and to provide the roots that people just really want to know where they are in the story. And sidebar to that, being able to work now with our new immigrant population, who are the first or second generation coming around, to having the conversation with them saying, you are setting down the roots. And so what can we save of yours? What can you save of yours, so that your 4 generations down the road don't have the same orphan problem that we're seeing with some people that didn't save the stuff, and watching the light bulbs go on for people. That's cool.
That was a really great answer, although I feel like there should be a bumper sticker somewhere that's like Anoka County Historical Society finding dead grandparents or something like that. We can find your dead grandparents. You know, just a little marketing idea from me to you. All right, thank you. And Jenna.
I don't know if I can add anything to those answers. Those were fantastic, and I echo pretty much everything in them. I would say the best thing, and sometimes the worst thing too, about my job is just the sheer variety of what I get to do. I get to do so many different things. I love working with donors. I love working with the public who's coming in looking for information. I love that we're a public library and we have such low barriers to access that we can just give stuff out. I don't have those other concerns that you do encounter in some archives. We're all about public access and free access. I love that. I love getting to organize materials. I love getting to do a little bit of this and that. Social media posts, create an exhibit, you know, organize a box full of material. I've just transitioned us to a new content management, data management system for our finding aids that we've never had before. Now they're searchable. So just so many different things I get to do. That I love that. What the downside to that is that sometimes I just wish that I could just do one thing and just finish this one thing. If I'm processing a collection, I wish sometimes that I just had a month or a week or 2 days where all I had to do was that, and then it could just be done and fully the finding aid complete. So sometimes that can be a little frustrating, that things do take a little bit longer because we have so many plates spinning and so many plates to keep spinning, but it's a good problem, all things considered.
It is a good problem. I will say the variety answer has been popular for the good, but that's the first time I've heard it also as a negative, and it makes sense. I mean, sometimes it's hard to have so many balls up in the air at once. You just want to have the one at a time. Okay, so I think that we've kind of covered this too, but we'll talk about it directly. Is there a specialized skill set that is needed for your positions outside of what we would consider typical library skills? And if so, did you have it before you got your job, or did you learn it afterward? And along with this, are there like special degrees or licenses or certifications that go along with a position in an archive? All right, who's my first victim? Let's go with Natasha.
So I guess for me specifically, there wasn't really anything besides a lot of on-the-job learning and learning on the fly and learning how the brands interact with each other and how the organization uses the archive. So I would say for me personally, it was a lot of on the job, just needing to know what's going on organizational wise beyond the archive. And then also I would say maybe being okay with maybe unusual substances coming in with collections. Like, for example, I had a collection that came in from an oat factory that was covered in oat flour dust. So being okay with, not every day is going to be like a super glamorous day in the archive. Sometimes you do get a little dirty.
All right, thank you. Jenna?
I would say yes, you definitely have to be okay getting dirty and dusty. I have a severe dust allergy, or so I've been told, yet I'm in dusty places all the time. So you gotta be okay with that. I would say there are skills that are useful to have coming in. I have a concentration in archives from my graduate school days. So I'm a librarian, I have an MLIS, but the concentration was archives. Most of my coursework was archives. I thought that was really useful. There is a certification process for archives if you want to become a certified archivist. I am not a certified archivist. I did go through the process though, but then never actually paid my dues and joined. It's a test, basically. You have to meet some qualifications. I believe you have to have a graduate degree, but I'm not sure on that. But you can look it up, certified archivist. You sit the exam. You have to have a certain number of years of experience in archives in order for them to certify you. And then you need to continue doing professional development sorts of things, publishing, or retake the test in order to be recertified in following years. So that's there. I don't think it's essential necessarily, but it can be useful. Some jobs do require you to be a certified archivist. I would say the most important thing, and this has really already been said, but is to do some archives, to be in some different archives and see how different archives are run. I mentioned that all of our materials are unique. It kind of means every archive is unique to the way they're organized, and the way everything works is going to be different, and in some cases very different from each other. So the more you can experience before you're in charge of your own, the better, because then you can pick and choose the good from the bad.
Great, thank you. Rebecca?
Okay. As far as special skills go for us, we're not the Smithsonian, right? So special skills at our level are completely different than what an archivist at a different level would need, just as far as specialty goes. Not to say that we're any less professional, right? So take it and flip it on a horizontal axis, that we're at the same professional level, but we don't, you're following what I'm saying, right? We're no less special, but we're less special, right? I think that the trick is you got to check your ego at the door. If you don't know it, say so, because you got one chance. You've got this thing that's however many years old in front of you, and if you screw it up, you screw it up. So if you don't know, ask, and no one will take your caution as a negative. It will actually work in your favor as a positive. It's the measure twice, cut once mentality, right? So if you have an ego that you don't check at the door and you bluster through, and all of a sudden, you've just wrecked an archive item, you've just wrecked a collection item, you've done more damage to your job than you ever would not having the skill in the first place. YouTube is a brilliant place to find things out. There's always other professionals on the other line of a phone call. Even if it is the Smithsonian that you're calling, someone out there wants to answer your question. They want to help you out. And so I think that's one of the beautiful skills that we could all develop is, there are people to ask, and being open and receptive to going and seeking that information, asking the questions. The other skills specific to my job and the admin that I've come to understand are extremely helpful is the CPPM designation of the project manager, and going through the project management sessions. And I took mine through St. Thomas, and it was an investment of time and energy, but the skills from that, even just being able to say, we do that, but now I know that it has a name. and I know the process that we go through has a name, and I can identify that process on paper. And if someone up the food chain in my fundraising, or the county board wants me to talk about a project with this language, now I can use that language, and it makes it different. When we work with, say, Federal Cartridge, right? So they're just down the road in Anoka. They're turning 100 this coming year. So we've been working specifically with their collection, and they offloaded so many boxes of, so they were finding things in the back of the boiler room. I mean, so much stuff. But they're a huge corporation. And so being able to talk to them about stop loss and using their corporate language, using their words to create a project plan, they felt more comfortable giving us money from that standpoint. So play the game to a large degree.
Great. All very useful, I think. So are there professional organizations that are specific to archivists, and do you belong to them? And if so, what benefit does this add to your job? And Jenna.
Oh, yes, there are lots of organizations. I belong to some of them. The big one is the Society of American Archivists. I do not belong to that. I used to when I was a student and for a year or so after that, but the membership is expensive and I let that one go. I do, however, still subscribe to a few of their listservs, which, as Rebecca was just mentioning, are a great way to bounce questions off of people. And you can be on 3 of their listservs without being a member. So I'm on 3. There is MAC, which is the Midwest Archives Conference, which is our regional conference that is the Midwest, very, very broadly defined, from like the Dakotas to Kentucky. And that is a wonderful resource. They have an annual conference most of the time, which is really worth going to, in my opinion. And then locally, there is TCART, which is the Twin Cities Archives Roundtable, which meets a couple of times a year. We have a symposium in the fall, and we have a spring meeting as well, which is also a great way to meet people really throughout the state. Despite the Twin Cities name, it really covers the state.
Great. And what's the benefit that you found of being a part of these?
Oh, just the chance to bounce things off of people. It's such a community of people who have probably encountered what you are encountering and can assist you with that, as well as great opportunities for professional development, for courses. SAA in particular offers a lot of classes. MAC does as well. They have at least one smaller conference annually that is more of a workshop. And all of these have great professional development aspects. But really, I think the most useful to me probably is just that network of people that I can email when I encounter a weird format I've never seen before and say, hey, what did you do with this? Or have you ever had to organize something that isn't organized in this particular way of being unorganized, and what did you do with it? Is just invaluable.
Wonderful. Thank you. Rebecca.
Yes, and I love not going first. You guys make all the work so much easier. TCART is amazing. We love TCART. MAC, all those guys. Minitex is another group that has some wonderful resources attached to it, and they've got a lot of subsidiary groups and networks. They're all very friendly over there. History related specifically, there's the Oral History Association. That group is, if you have a problem with your oral history, they will talk you under the table. They're brilliant. And there's a lot of university groups, on that one, a lot of university archives. So again, the quality of help that you're getting, it's people that really do know more than you do. So it's a wonderful place to go find people smarter than yourself and to reach out for that help. Then we have, hold on to your acronyms. You got AASLH, AAM, AMM, MALHM. So we pick a letter combo. They're all in there. My favorite locally is MALM. They're the Minnesota Alliance of Local History Museums, or something like that. The logo is purple. But they do an every Wednesday get together thing virtually now. And they've been doing that all the way through April. And so that's something that you can just, you know, catch whenever. Mom and the local history group, they're a pretty good crowd. The AMM is the American Midwest Museums. So they're just our neighborhood up north here in the States. And then the AAM is the American Association of Museums. They're the ones that we connected with for Facing Change, which is that DEAI training that I had referenced earlier with our application process. And so they're the reason that we ended up, is one of 50 museums selected nationwide to participate in that project, was our association with them. So things fall in your lap because of relationships that you build, or because you've gone to a few things, you've stuck your nose in a few places. And so, you know, you're not able to predict the benefits, but you know them when you see them.
That's a good way of putting it. They're there. You might not be able to see them up front, but they're there. And Natasha.
Okay, well, I don't have many other acronyms than what was already presented, because that's a lot of them. But I would say SAA I found really useful attending the conference. I haven't had the opportunity to attend any of the Midwest archives, but I would say the most useful to me has been TCART, especially they have a subsect of TCART, which is the business archivists. And at least for me personally, being able to talk to the target archivists or the archivists at Cargill and get some ideas about how a corporate archivist is dealing with certain collections or dealing with the corporate structure is super useful. So again, I just want to kind of echo that idea that you never know what questions or what problems other people might be encountering, and being able to have some sort of network that you can get in touch with is really, really useful.
Great answers. Thank you. Okay. So kind of going along with this, and I know a couple of you mentioned professional development, but are there opportunities for continued training or professional development for your job, and what kinds and where do they come from? Is it in-house or from these conferences and associations? So Natasha.
Okay. Yep. So I would say definitely SAA for professional development as an archivist I found pretty useful, but internally at General Mills, there's lots of opportunities to learn more about managing styles. I mean, HR does a fabulous job with General Mills in terms of our diversity and inclusion program. There is so much information about that available internally that there is lots of training and opportunities internally.
Great. Thank you. Jenna?
Sure. I would say Hennepin County and Hennepin County Library both do a wonderful job as well with professional development opportunities and in-house classes and resources. We actually, within the library, have been receiving, I think it's weekly, a list of suggested resources from one of our librarians, online webinars, different sorts of things we can do to improve our librarianship in all sorts of ways. Now, one thing that is a little strange about being an archivist in many settings is we're often sort of an oddity wherever we are. There's rarely like a standalone archive that is just an archive. So we're an archivist in a university library, or we're an archivist in a corporate setting, or we're an archivist in a public library. So we're always just a little bit different. And that's certainly true in the public library setting too. So for things like that, I really do find some of these professional organization trainings to just be great. SAA has some fantastic trainings that are really good, really detailed, especially about the sort of things that are always new and upcoming, because we're always, well, not always, but often kind of like 20 years or so behind whatever the technology was. So when you start seeing stuff. So when you start getting a whole bunch of VHS tapes or a whole bunch of Betamaxes, like, oh, well, we haven't had these before. What are we going to do with them? And so there's that perpetual need for for figuring out how to handle new stuff, especially now with the digital.
Fabulous. Thank you. Rebecca.
Yeah, I will echo Jenna on that digital learning, because I know Audra and I had that conversation when I started back, 6 years ago, and we looked at each other and we said, so now what? Because you've got all these VHS tapes that are coming in, people are cleaning out the closets, and yeah, you don't know what to do with them. And at that time, nobody had really come up with a system yet. So then you end up being part of a group developing a system. And that in and of itself is an education, because you can be part of the solution, and then you can just keep the conversation moving and learn from that in future things. Now we're dealing with thumb drives. Well, now you can adapt what you just did with the VHS to things like thumb drives. Or digital born, that's screenshots. Oh, screenshots of social media for keeping those, so there's so many new archiving elements. The other thing that we've found really useful is, connecting with Chamber of Commerce folks. That would give you some business training and how to survive in the business world, and how to speak with people on a more professional, non-librarian geek side of things. There's a different speech pattern that we used with different groups of people, and that's just how we move through this world, and learning that language and navigating that, contacting, your Politico people. Most libraries and museums and not corporate archives necessarily, but libraries and museums are connected into some sort of philanthropy and some sort of governmental body that, you just can't get around it. You're connected in with them. And so if they understand what you're doing and you understand how they create budgets, then you've got a better chance of surviving moving forward. So even at, outside of an admin position, even as an archivist, if I can coach someone like Audra, who's in that position, to go share that job out, and so people don't think that it's just moving things from a shoebox to the shelf all the time, that there is so much more to do in the job, and so much more professional, education that goes along with it. All those acronyms, they all have webinars out there, and most of them are free. Some of them are $20 or so each, but they're all incredibly useful for the most part. There might be a few duds out there, but for the most part, anything that I click on has been, at least reinforcing what I know, even if it's not new information. So it keeps you on the path of, yes, you are going in the straight line, and you are actually doing the right thing. And I think that's equally valuable as to getting new information, is just double checking yourself and make sure that you haven't somehow strayed over here, and so you can course correct on that. And I find that useful. The university classes, like I mentioned, St. Thomas, and taking that CPPM class through them. So that was kind of a specialty class that they offered for corporate folks and nonprofit folks, but even just taking regular course credits through them once in a while, and go take a statistics class, or something ridiculous that may or may not help you down the line as a point of curiosity.
Great, wonderful suggestions. Okay. So let's talk about paths, and we talked about this a little in the beginning, but do you see archivists or archivism as a job that would work well for someone transitioning from another field, or would it be best for someone with their sights set on it from the start? Can you kind of transition into this, or should you be focused on it from the beginning? And then why or why not? This is, I guess, more of an opinion thing, but Rebecca, I'm going to make you go first this time.
I love that you say archivism like it's a...
Is that not a thing? Can you not say that?
I'm stricken with the archivism. So
it sounded right when I said it.
It was awesome. I love it. So yes, when you find yourself stricken with archivism, there's only one thing to do, is follow the path to completion of being an archivist. Yes, you can darn it, you can change path anytime you want to. I'm a firm believer in that. And it's going to be messy, but you know, what the heck, life is messy. So, you know, you start out on this path over here and it worked for a while. And now this seems interesting. So, you know, veer your way around. I think that's where the smaller organizations are super important as becoming that fishbowl of experience. You know, the organization, the Rockford Area Historical Society, right, that they needed a human to come in and keep the house open and do tours. They mentioned nothing to me about actually taking care of the collection because it's a historic house. You know, things are sitting on shelves and they dusted it every once in a while. The fact that I could go in there and make sure the numbers were right and make sure things were in past perfect correctly and update past perfect and, you know, create spreadsheets and do things for them. And it was a huge help to them as an organization where they never dreamed that that would be something that they could have at a professional level, you know, get grants to actually do things right, you know. And so those smaller organizations need the skills and that two-way street of using those smaller organizations to hone your skills while you're transitioning, you know, into, dare I say, bigger and better things. That's the wrong way to look at it, but that's the language I have right now. You know, it's helping everybody along the food chain. And so the transitions are actually critical to keeping, you know, there's 500 history organizations in this state. And most of them are volunteer and some of them have part-time help. So they're never going to attract someone, you know, with 30 years of experience and a master's degree or a PhD. It's not going to happen. So they're perfect training grounds. So transition all you want to and help out the little people. They need you.
There are 500 history organizations in this state. Is that what you just said?
Yes.
Wow. Really?
Yes. It's insane.
Clearly.
It is absolutely nuts. And it goes anywhere from the little neighborhood, you know, place where you drive by and it's like, call George and he'll open it up for you, you know, and on up. And they're fascinating. But yeah, 500 of them.
Wow, that is amazing.
Yeah.
All right, Natasha.
I think you definitely need to have flexibility with the idea of wanting to be an archivist, because I think we've said it before, there's not a lot of positions that specifically say archivist in the title. So I think starting out with the idea that you want to be an archivist for sure is, I mean, definitely it's okay to have your heart set on something, but definitely start smaller. Maybe see first if you like it. So again, like volunteering at an organization, maybe having a smaller internship, or just checking to see if they need help organizing a collection to make sure that it's what you're interested in. And also realizing that some of the smaller projects are not necessarily everything that involves what an archivist does, and what the day-to-day would be for an archivist. So I think starting out with some volunteer opportunities is really good. And then being open to embracing things outside of your comfort zone. I would say applying to jobs that you may not be quite qualified for yet, but it's never a bad idea to even get the experience of getting an interview if possible.
Great. Jenna.
I like going last, like Rebecca was saying earlier. I feel like everything's been said. The only things I would add to that are you can absolutely transition from another area of librarianship or from something that isn't librarianship at all. If you just have a love for history, that's how a lot of us end up as archivists, and that works too. And if you working with a local historical organization is fantastic, but also even the other local organizations you already are involved with have their own history. That's a big part of what we collect at Hennepin County Library is local clubs, local organizations, neighborhood associations, all different sorts of groups. So preserve the history of the groups you're already working with. partner with a local archive. Maybe they'd be interested in receiving the material. Maybe you could organize it before it got to them. Maybe you could organize it with them as a way to meet some new people, but to get involved with those existing organizations too and preserve that history that's happening now or happening recently before it goes away.
You guys have such great practical suggestions. So what about job advancement? Is there a natural stepping stone, a path that you move on, or is it like you're an archivist and that's it? All right, let's see. Jenna likes to go last, and Rebecca likes to go last, but Natasha never gets to go last. So Jenna, you get to go first.
That's fair. I don't know that there's exactly a natural stepping stone. I mentioned before that we're always kind of a little bit of an oddity in most of the places that we work as archivists. So there certainly are opportunities to move into other positions and administrative roles if that's something that you're interested in. If what you're interested in, though, is being an archivist, there's, of course, being an archivist at a larger institution or an institution with a different focus or an institution where you're overseeing more archivists, a role that's more specialized toward one thing, becoming a digital archivist or becoming a web archivist. But those would sort of be your options. If you really like that day-to-day archivist work, then being an archivist and just moving into bigger institutions would probably be the advancement role. If you're interested in administration, then your options open up much, much wider, but you might be looking at a position where you're an administrator in a public library, an administrator in a university library. So something that's wider than an archive or a historical society.
Great. Rebecca?
Yes, that's so much easier. Yeah, because archivists, you take care of stuff. So you either take care of stuff in a small place, or you take care of stuff in a big place, or you take care of stuff with friends, or you take care of stuff by yourself. Those are kind of your options. But following Audra's path anyway, she really had her heart set on doing corporate archives. That's really what she enjoyed from doing some internships back in her grad studies. And, jobs are hard to get, they really are. So you're not necessarily going to find that dream job right away. So you take your stepping stone jobs to get the experience so that your dream job has the resume that just glows because you've put in your time and you've gotten where you need to go. So we were her stepping stone to the dream job. She's now working for the Ayn Rand collections, and she just absolutely loves Ayn Rand as a person, and so now managing her personal collection is absolutely wonderful. So it's not a corporate collections job, so even her dream job changed when the opportunity came up. So I think the biggest thing about advancement is to realize that you may have a path in your mind, but don't leave that so narrow that you miss the other opportunities either side of it. Because Audra wouldn't have seen this Ayn Rand opportunity if she was solely set on a corporate archive position. But you're right that if you take a step sideways to the admin, there are considerably more jobs, nonprofit as a whole. Most of them all have archives. Our local fire department has an archive. So there are lots and lots of places that need archivists.
Great. And Natasha?
I like going last too. And I really like the idea of these stepping stones in your career journey to get to a potential dream job, or maybe realizing that there's a different dream that you didn't realize initially. I would say, I guess in the corporate setting, especially in General Mills, there's not really like an advancement per se, but I would say there's opportunities to develop the archive out fuller. So for example, when I first was an intern, it was the corporate archivist, Katie, who is also working in the archives, but she had just been part-time. as an archive staff, and then there was 2 interns. When I was hired as the archivist, we had the archives assistant and then 1 intern. So it kind of started to build up basically as the organization realized the value in having an archives in-house. They were more willing, once they saw the return of investment on that, to hire more full-time staff. So also, even when I started, technically the assistant archivist was on the same level as me, and technically now they are a direct report to me. So there's kind of opportunities to build yourself in the organization that'll kind of lift yourself up a little bit or lift the archives up. But I know that those aren't available at all archives, but if those opportunities are there, definitely take advantage of them.
Great. I feel like in a lot of the weeks that we've talked to when we've discussed that question, it seems like there's a lot of library positions that are the same, that, you know, if that's the job you want to do, that's what you're going to do. And there's not really a lot of advancement unless you want to go into administration and leave the position entirely. It seems to be a common theme that I've noticed in these weeks that we've been doing this. So maybe that's kind of a hallmark of the library field. You love what you do and you expect to do it. So, all right. Let's talk about the pandemic. How has the pandemic changed your job? They all want to go last, but somebody has to go first. So I'll start with Rebecca.
Oh, so much stuff. Okay, so the reason we were able to just shut the doors to the museum on March 17th and not panic was because we'd spent 5 years getting everything online, right? So we transitioned from using Past Perfect to Collective Access, which is a web-based archiving collections management software. QuickBooks, OneDrive, you name it, everything. We had just been transitioning to get everything on the cloud, mostly because I was worried about my 15-year-old server crashing. That was really the reason behind it. And all of a sudden, pandemic, I'm like, oh, hey, look, cool, it's all done. You know, we had a new website that we rolled out last year that had the capacity to hold digital, you know, online collections and exhibits and link everywhere. And so the structure was there. And so we didn't have a lot of the anxiety that some of the other history centers did. And I know Audra, as the archivist, was extremely grateful that, you know, she could do so much from home. You know, we could answer research requests. You know, there was a lot of cleanup to do still. We'd only spent the last 2 years transitioning the information over, so there was still a lot of data to clean up in Collective Access. A lot of things that we were using on our internal side, that there's a mechanism, a toggle switch, that you can take that and turn it public, so that there's a public facing search of our collection now. So just taking each of those collections in batch, tossing them to the public and making sure that they transferred correctly. So it was less tissue up the sleeve of the dress archiving and less paper in the folder archiving than it was, you know, managing the data and updating the metadata and checking on zeros and ones to make sure that things weren't getting corrupted. So it gave us an opportunity, actually, from that standpoint, to do things that were quiet jobs that we hadn't really taken care of in the past. So from that standpoint, it was a huge opportunity. As far as being worried about the position, pandemic wise, I'll be really honest with you guys. We're looking at, you know, a $40,000 to $50,000 ouch next year for the budget, and I have no idea where that's coming from. We have some reserves. We're lucky in that respect. So, you know, if the fundraising that I hate doesn't pan out, we do have the reserves to fall back on. But it was suggested, you know, let's cut some positions, or let's cut a position, and that would be an easy find for some money. And we have the mission and the value statement to fall back on, that our entire reason for existing is the archivist position. You know, it's not the volunteer position. It's not the front desk answering the phone position. It's not my position. The entire reason the museum exists is to preserve stuff, and the stuff preserver is the archivist. So as a core mission, that position is about as safe as anybody could possibly be right now. You know, as long as that's written into your mission and value statement. But I think archivists and collections people have a tremendous benefit right now of having a core function in these organizations.
Great, wonderful. Natasha.
So I do feel like I might be a little bit different again with being corporate archivists. I would say General Mills, since we are a global organization with locations in China, there was already like this idea that we were getting ready for something quite a long time before March. So already General Mills had been planning a work from home test date when suddenly they were just like, okay, well, actually just for the next 2 weeks, we're going to be all working from home. And we had already been kind of preparing before that to basically work on projects or things that maybe we were saving for a really snowy day or something that we had been putting off for a long time that we could accomplish digitally. And thankfully, all of our databases and collections that we use are primarily internet-based. So we did have a lot of opportunity to review those and work on those. Yeah, I would say that the transition to work from home was definitely tough. I think for the intern myself and the assistant archivist, part of the allure of archives is definitely the physical side of it. So it was definitely a little bit of a tough transition, but we were really grateful that we did have the opportunity to do the things that we had maybe been putting off for a while. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. Jenna?
Sure. So a little bit of what everybody has already said. We also started working from home in March. We are now back to having special collections staff in our department every day as of a few weeks ago, but our days rotate. So we're each in about 2 days a week. Special collections is still closed to the public, our department reading room. The libraries are open for limited grab and go service, but special collections is still closed. That being said, we have been providing remote reference since we closed. We, like other folks have mentioned, we have extensive digital collections. So over the last several years, digitizing has been one of the chief foci of our department, and it's really paid off. We have extensive digital collections. We're still able to meet almost all reference requests without accessing our physical collections. It also happened to coincide, COVID did, with a few web-based projects. I mentioned earlier, Archive Space. We'd been working on transitioning all of our finding aids to Archive Space, and that was happening right about the same time. So as of a couple months ago, those are online now too. So that gave me a nice web-based project to work on. It also was a good chance to rev up some of our web-based projects. We have been doing some web archiving for a while, and Rebecca's heard me talk about this already, but we've been doing some web archiving for a while, and this was a good chance to really grow our web archiving project a lot. So that's archiving websites. So capturing and saving websites. If you're familiar with the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine, it's the same kind of concept. And we've been able to do a lot of that with events that have been happening. So with COVID, how that's affected Hennepin County, as well as with the death of George Floyd and how that has affected Hennepin County. So in that way, there's been a lot we've been able to do, as well as some I've been able to process from home. I've been able to conduct programs for the public from home. So it's changed a lot, but we're doing quite a lot.
Great. And now you brought up George Floyd, and that made me just wonder. So when something like that happens and it's current and it's clearly a big thing and it's going to be an historical moment that people will be looking at for years, do you look at it and think, I would like to preserve this, and I would like to, do you reach out and try to track those things down, or do you just hope it comes your way?
Yes, good question.
Thank you.
Sort of both and. We've been focusing a lot on web archives, on materials that we can collect without necessarily having to reach out while people and organizations are trying to do what their real purpose is. So while they're trying to react, while they're trying to experience these experiences and help in these situations, we don't want to become one more thing they have to do. So the things that we can collect sort of on the sidelines and then say later, hey, we've got this, is that okay? We like to do that. We have also been working with library staff on some photo collecting projects. So related to COVID, related to the death of George Floyd and events after that as well. Again, something that's a little bit more, I don't like the word passive, but because we're still really actively doing it, but something that's a little less intrusive maybe is a way to say that. That being said, we're always reaching out to organizations. We're always interested in organizations reaching out to us. So however those relationships can happen, but we're also really cognizant that it isn't always the best time to reach out to an organization. To kind of wait and see when might be a good time, and to work with some other community partners and partners within the library, just to make sure that all of our colleagues who are at these 41 libraries across Hennepin County and have all these wonderful relationships with community members and groups, make sure they know about us, and to know that we're interested in these materials, and to know that we're happy to chat with community members and learn more about the things that they're doing, the things that might be a good fit. If someone's doing an oral history project, we'd like to learn about it. We'd like to know and preserve it if we can. So to learn about all those things and to provide resources. I had a class a couple months ago on how to organize your own organization's archives. I've got another one coming up in a couple weeks about how to conduct an oral history project. So kind of how can we help you without being one more thing that you have to deal with?
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. So you all kind of aimed for a career working in the archives. Was there anything, once you got a job doing this, was there anything that surprised you about the job? Natasha.
Ooh, okay. So let me, I think the biggest thing for me that really surprised me is just really the generosity of people and their interest in getting their materials to some place where it will have meaning. So for example, like the one thing that's really coming to top of mind right now is we just had an offer for a donation for a oven that's from 1949 from the first Pillsbury Bake Off. And the contestant for this Bake Off, she was interviewed by the company when she turned 100 years old. She was around 102, and unfortunately last month she did pass away, but her family remembered like what an incredible experience it was for her to compete in the Bake Off and what an impact that had on her life. And they wanted to be able to get this artifact to some place where it would be appreciated. So I'm really excited for this opportunity and just being able to connect with people on such a personal level and being able to have such personal stories to be able to share about artifacts. So it's just such a neat opportunity to be able to connect with people that you may not have thought about.
Which now makes me wonder, how big is your archive? I mean, if you can collect an oven, that you have to have a lot of space for, they're not small, right? Cereal boxes, I mean, okay, those can be small, but how big is your archive, Natasha?
We have about 3,000 square feet that is temperature and humidity controlled. We do have to be selective. So I will say we used to have more space, but within the last 2 years, we did move to a space that's slightly smaller. So that's definitely a challenge in moving from a larger archive to a smaller archive. So we are selective, but we like to collect things that have a good, impactful story. We prioritize those. If there is a story and a good connection that we can support with a lot of other artifacts that we already have, those are like just the best that we can have.
Great, thank you. And Rebecca.
I think from an archivist standpoint at the Anoka County Historical Society, one of the most surprising things is just what you do find. And I say find in air quotes because it's always been there. So, you know, it's not like you're discovering anything new, but you're rediscovering it. Like we found a pickle in a jar, you know, about 8 months ago. And it's a legit, you know, pickle, like pickle, big pickle. And it grew in a jar because the guy back in 1914 or whatever, you know, stuck the vine into the jar and literally grew the pickle in the jar. And then they put vinegar on it and stuck a cork in it. And it sat around until the 1960s when people died. And they're like, here, we think enough of you to take our pickle. And you know, who knows? I mean, it sits on the shelf and you don't think that it's there because you got so much stuff. And then one day you trip over it and here you think that we have a pickle in a jar. And it was the quirkiest thing to us, you know, as, you know, 3 humans that had never seen a pickle in a jar before. And so we wrote a column on it and we're like, hey, and turns out that this was a thing and that there are pickles in jars all over the place. And so we ended up with like more donations of pickles in jars. And, you know, and so I guess the surprising thing is what's novel to you is not novel to someone else and vice versa. You know, you get people that walk in the door with, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my God. We're like, yeah, well, we already have 5. So old news, but we appreciate your unique story to it. Can't really help you. But so I think that's the surprising part is it's a daily reminder that what you think is special is old news to somebody else and vice versa. And it puts things like the news and relationships and daily living in perspective that, you know, the world doesn't actually revolve around us, you know, that there are actually a million other perspectives. And so I think just that life lesson was good to learn.
Great answer. Pickle in a jar. Jenna.
I wholeheartedly agree. I don't have any pickles in jars, at least I don't think I do. But that I wholeheartedly agree. I think especially with that conversation about what's valuable and to whom and how does that conversation work, because you're absolutely right. I've had those phone calls too, and that's something that always surprises me, are the folks that walk in and say, I have this thing, it's so fantastic. It's, you know, the newspaper about the Kennedy assassination. Oh, I don't really want a newspaper about the Kennedy assassination. But if you have a conversation a little bit and you know they're interested in history and, oh, well, you'd absolutely never be interested in, you know, all of my family's World War II letters. It's like, oh, yeah, I would be interested in that. So to build those relationships and have those conversations and kind of figure out what that we're both really interested in preserving this history, and we think that's important. So what do you have that might be a good fit for me, and what do you have that maybe isn't, but that I can understand is really valuable to you, and how do we have those conversations and just improve the historical record, make sure that the history of our area or whatever the case may be is available for everybody for the future. Oh, and then the other thing that surprises me a little bit is still how much we haven't really figured out digital. Like I thought maybe once I was working in it a little bit longer, that somebody would just know it all and they just tell me, and that still isn't really the case. We're still all kind of figuring it out, and we have more best practices than we used to, and we have more tools than we used to, but we're still really figuring it out.
That sounds like a secret of the library. They don't really know what they're doing. They're just making it up as they go along. Okay. Give us a story. I know we just heard the pickle in a jar story, but I want another story. A story from your job. It can be anything. It can be something that you found funny or intriguing or mysterious, or, you know, pick your own adjective. Tell me your best work story. Who looks like they've got a good one ready for me? Jenna, you look like you have a good one.
Oh, but I don't, Olivia. I don't have a good one. I have a couple, and I know as soon as I tell either or both of these, I will think like at 8 o'clock tonight, I will come up with the best story that I should have told. But I haven't
email
told
me.
any like fun stuff I found in the collection yet, stories, and I suppose I can't go through this without telling one of those. So something that was kind of fun that I found in a collection, I was processing the papers of the Elliott Park Neighborhood Association, which is one of the neighborhoods in Minneapolis, kind of in the area of US Bank Stadium and HCMC, that part of Minneapolis. And I found this thing, and it was clearly like a manuscript for a book. It was held together with clips. It was maybe, I don't know, 2 inches thick. And it wasn't in a folder, it was just in a box with a bunch of papers. And it was called Bombay. And I have no idea what this is. I have no idea what this has to do with Elliott Park neighborhood. Couldn't figure it out. So just sort of set it in my pile to deal with later. Eventually I finished everything else, came back, it was still there. And so I started reading it. And I read a couple of pages of it, and it was clearly a script. I thought, okay, like, this seems vaguely familiar. So I thought I had a hunch of what it was, and I Googled it and I YouTubed it. And yep, sure enough, what this clearly is an early draft of a script for the Mighty Ducks, which was taped, of course, in Minneapolis, and large parts of it in Elliott Park neighborhood. So the neighborhood association building was a backdrop for some of the movie, and they had been involved in helping to set up some of the filming in the neighborhood. So it made sense that it would be there, and we were able to keep it because it had a purpose in that collection. It wasn't just something that ended up in the wrong drawer, but it was sort of a weird, neat little find.
That's a pretty good story. But if you do think of a better one, you can always email me and I can share it with the group.
Thank you.
All right, Rebecca. You can't use pickle in a jar. You got to do something else.
But that's the best part about being an archivist, is reusing your information and repackaging it in different ways, right? Okay, how about a cool thing that, so before I took the job, so we're like, 15 years ago, the Historical Society chose to do an exhibit on Vietnam. And they chose Vietnam because the veterans at the time were, starting to get old, and, they're dying, and much like the World War II story, right? But nobody was paying any attention to the story of the Vietnam veterans because, it was a pretty contentious situation and nobody wanted to talk about it. So the Historical Society had an in of an in of an in, and etc. But we ended up connected to the Vietnam chapter at the local Legion and built some relationships, built some trust, and put together an oral history project through a grant from the legacy funds, and interviewed the Vietnam veteran and their spouse separately. And so by doing separate interviews, they felt like they could speak a little bit more freely than, if they were together doing a couples interview, and put together the exhibit. And in many cases, we heard that the families coming in to see the exhibit, this was the first time that their veteran spoke of the war, the first time they had seen any of the archives from their veteran, any of those artifacts. And we had one couple in particular that, in listening to each other's oral history, came to find out that he went to Vietnam. He had to drop out of college because he didn't have the $500 in order to pay next month's tuition or next semester's tuition. So he ended up dropping out, and that's when his draft card came up. So he left. His then fiance had to leave the university because there was so much protesting going on that she didn't feel safe saying that she was, fianced to a then service member. But he didn't know that. She had given him the reason that she had run out of money as well. And, and 50 years, these guys dated in kindergarten, and they were together in college. And all this time, he's now 78-ish. And so, he was about 60 when the story finally came out. And all this time, he had no idea that that's what his wife had done for him at that point. So that story then fast forwards to now, where we're a lot more focused on immigrant stories. And we had a woman named Patau, who is Hmong heritage, come in to speak to our board one day. And the crossover of her grandfather, who was a local human who was trained by the Americans to fight for the Americans, but, you know, Laotian, and the crossover of these Vietnam stories with her family's story, it was amazing how the intersections were happening. And we wouldn't have had the base to talk to her without having done the Vietnam oral histories. And we wouldn't have the immigrant story of her family being in refugee camps and whatnot to overlay onto the American white Vietnam story. And so now we've got this like multifaceted story that, you know, we can grow forward, you know, if we can find more people like Patau and her family, to just create the depth to the Vietnam story in Anoka County that, you know, and that's turning into, you know, it's a 20-year project now. So it's just cool.
It's really cool. I love how everything kind of weaves together and it's all part of one big story.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Love it.
Okay. And Natasha.
Wow, I don't know how I'll be able to follow up that because that is so amazing to be able to have that many layers. But I guess it did make me think of one way I like to frame some of the stories we have about our brands in the archive is they are more legends, because we may or may not have the information that backs it up. And who knows if it was actually a story that somebody like made up in the 50s to describe like what the history of the brand was. So that way it was way more exciting. But one story that I always think about is the origin of Wheaties, which is coming up on its 100th birthday next year in 2021, kind of. Is that when Wheaties first was pitched to the company, it was kind of discovered by a health clinician in Minneapolis who was trying to figure out a way to feed his patients. And he spilled his hot bran gruel on the stove and it crisped up and it formed this flake. And he brought this idea to the company and sold it to us for a certain amount of money. And we like worked on developing it and it didn't work out very well. But then like 4 years later, after like 52 formulas, they finally like were able to get it into a package, and instead of calling it just whole wheat flakes, we called it Wheaties. But it's also funny because that same story is very similar to another cereal company, Kellogg's, except for instead of bran gruel, it's cornflakes. And corn gruel on the stove, crisping up and forming a flake. So it's just kind of interesting that sometimes the stories that we have aren't always, I don't want to say it not trustworthy, but they have a kernel of truth. But sometimes the archives either has the rest of the truth or we don't know where the story came from.
It'd be a little too coincidental that both of those stories were true, is what you're telling me.
Yeah, maybe. Especially since I do think that Kellogg's is a little bit earlier than that one, but
I can't believe Wheaties is 100 years old. That's crazy to me. All right. Those were some really great stories, by the way. That was fabulous. All right. We only have one question left, if you can believe that. And that question is, what did you not learn in library school that you wish you did? So, Rebecca, I'm going to make you go first on this one.
I learned nothing in library school.
I know.
I wish I'd learned it all. Oh dear.
College, grad school, whatever you like.
Oh my gosh. I honestly, I think the one thing that I wish any professor would have said to anybody was just don't lock yourself into your degree. You know, I came out with that mass comm, journalism, creative writing, photography conglomerate, you know, to work at a newspaper. And that was my path. And nobody said, hey, if you look beyond that title, what are the skills you're actually doing? You know, you're a storyteller, you're an organizer, you're juggling all these deadlines at one time, you're managing people, you're asking questions, you're thinking critically about things, you're making connections with people quickly. You know, if you're in an interview setting with someone as a reporter, you don't have time to spend 3 years building a relationship. You know, you've got to just build it as you go, and you're asking difficult questions of people, and they need to trust you in order to say those answers back. Well, it's the same thing that's happening in oral history. And nobody said, look at the skills you have and don't get stuck on the title. And how can you distill down the title and pull those skills out and then repackage them so that you're marketable to other systems? And what doors would that open up for you? And what would that look like? And where could you go? And how could you make that portable? And that didn't happen. So that's the one thing I wish somebody would have done for me.
That's a great life lesson that you're right. Everyone ought to learn that. Okay, Natasha.
So I do think this one's going to be a little bit more focused on corporate archives yet again, but I do wish that somebody had said anything about corporate archives and how related they can be to the records management department. I definitely feel like that's something that's missing, and I think understanding like the path that maybe a document takes in a more formal organization like a company takes through that path would have been really useful. And also, I really like the idea of transferable skills. That's super cool.
Really cool. And Jenna.
I really like going last. Yes to both of those. Building off of Natasha's, actually, I kind of think records management and data governance is a lot of the future of archives, to be honest, to be able to speak in that lingo and to be able to interact in that environment, because the days when stuff is old and filling up a storage closet and they want that storage closet back, those days are going away. So we're going to have to make more of a affirmative argument for archives right here, right now. Not that it's just something you can give us stuff 20 years after the fact. So I think that's really, really valuable. I will say I think my education dealt with that a little bit, but it could have done more. But my answer I have written down is going to sound like it's stealing from Rebecca a while ago, but I promise it is what is written on my notes. It is project management. I think it's so essential to what we do, but it isn't something that really much time was spent on at all. I think it's kind of assumed that, well, you're obviously doing it because you can't do archives without doing it, which to some extent is true, but to have more of that training and again, more of that lingo and the ability to interact more in that world of project managers, I think would have been really useful.
I'm going to wholeheartedly agree with you there, Jenna, because I believe every job I've ever had in a library has been called for project management skills. And we got none of that in library school, like zero project management. So yeah, hopefully today they're teaching it at least a little bit in library school, but I wouldn't hold my breath. Okay, that is the official list of questions, but is there anything that we have not gone over that you feel like our audience needs to know? Anything about archives, about your jobs, about anything at all that you just feel people need to know? This is your opportunity. Anyone can speak here. And you cannot all go last, so.
I guess I can go first. I think just as something funny that you mentioned earlier, Rebecca, about having a bison skull, I think it was. I have a bison rib, so we could we could like start building a bison with all the archivists. The only reason we have this bison rib is when they were building onto one of the buildings at General Mills, they were excavating and they found the bison rib. So they mounted it and put Ice Age bison rib on it, and now it lives in the archive.
Wow, this is the panel where we built a bison. This is great.
And also, in addition to Wheaties turning 100, Betty Crocker is also turning 100 next year. Cheerios is turning 80, and Monster Cereals is turning 50 next year. So look for fun things, hopefully surrounding those anniversaries.
Big year for General Mills next year.
I think that in and of itself was a really good example of what needs to happen with us, right? Whether it's museums, libraries, archives, corporate, whatever, the people who take care of the stuff. We need to create projects that share information. We need to create projects that are cool looking to the public. And we need to build our own future and our own interaction around that, because nobody's going to do it for us. And I think there's been a lot of silos up until this point, and it's not going to keep us going in the future. And so to create public programming that uses multiple collections from multiple locations, and say, Natasha, you work with Hennepin History Museum or something like that, and or the Minnesota Historical Society with their Mill City, or whatever. There's some pretty easy top level connections that I could just pull off. We could build a bison. I'm fun with that. We'll create a bison puzzle. There's got to be a few more ribs floating around the world somewhere. But I think that's what's going to keep us all going, is the partnerships and having people come in with projects and proposing projects, and us not just sitting around waiting for it to happen.
Great.
I agree. I think the more we can get our stuff out there and let people use it. I mean, there's so much reuse potential for our material too. I mean, we have fantastic photograph collections that are digitized, so many of them, and they tell wonderful family history. If you're looking for your grandparents, you can probably find them, that sort of thing. But they're also just fun. I mean, they took pictures of weird, funny things. I'm giving a presentation in a couple weeks, and I like to illustrate all my presentations the extent I can just with our own pictures. They probably don't have anything to do with what's exactly on the slide, but something in that picture will relate to what's there, and it's just fun stuff. So to the extent that we can think of new ways to use our stuff, new ideas, artist partnerships are great. A lot of archives are partnering with artists to kind of reimagine some of their material, think new ways, new opportunities that are out there for our stuff. And then the last thing that I missed my opportunity to plug earlier, but when someone was asking about where you could find an internship or where you could find a job, another great place to check is Archives Gig, which is a great archive job and internship board run by someone in Madison, Wisconsin, I think. But definitely add that one to your list of things to check.
There's a volunteer board floating around too that I know we use. Sarah uses it, so I'm not going to be able to pull the name off the top of my head. But it's a volunteer consortium. We post like our ghost tour docent needs and things like that on there. So you might be able to find some internships and things floating around out there that would be unpaid.
Excellent. Well, we are, believe it or not, almost at 6 o'clock. That was probably the fastest 2 hours. I had so much fun with you guys. I hope you guys had fun too. That was, I think, a blast talking about all of your amazing jobs. So thank you so much for participating. You were extraordinary. I hope our attendees enjoyed it as well. I am going to very quickly pop up that title card again so that you can see what's coming up for us, as well as the link to the evaluation, which I will be sending out to all of our attendees tomorrow. And I'm going to include the links that were posted in the chat as well. So if you did not grab those from the chat, or I know some people had to leave early, I will make sure all of those links are included as well. And Anne, was there anything you'd like to say?
Thanks for everything. I love these panels and how much we learn about everybody and their jobs and how enthusiastic you all are about your jobs. That's really wonderful. Sometimes I think we get into meetings with other librarians and you think, does anyone like their job? It's like, really, come on, people. So this was great, the inspiration and the information that you all shared. And it was great to have you, Rebecca, the non-librarian in the crowd. So thanks for being a good sport about that. So thanks. I really, I got some ideas for future Metronet programs that Olivia can organize. So I think it was a success. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely.
And thanks, of course, to the attendees.
Yes, thank you all so much. I appreciate it, and have a good night.
Thanks so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.